Title: I discovered her real plan. I was already gone. Story: I thought my wife was a stranger living in my house until I realized I was just the final piece of her digital trap. Now, as my reality begins to glitch and dissolve, I'm discovering that the only way to escape her game is to destroy the only version of me that still exists. The sunlight in our kitchen used to feel warm, but lately it feels surgical, like a cold, sterile light designed to expose every crack in the foundation of my life. Elena was standing by the counter, humming a melody that didn't belong to any song I recognized. It was low, rhythmic, and strangely precise. She was peeling an apple, the red skin spiraling down into the sink like a discarded secret. I sat at the wooden table, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm 10 minutes ago. I was supposed to be leaving for the airport in an hour. A 3-day business trip to Chicago, standard procedure. But as I watched her, I felt a vibration in the marrow of my bones, a warning signal that had been screaming at me for weeks, muffled only by the comfort of our domestic routine. Elena stopped humming. She didn't turn around, but she knew I was watching. She had always known. She laid the knife down with a soft, deliberate clack against the granite. "You packed the blue tie, right?" she asked, her voice as smooth as polished glass. "You know how much I hate that silk one with the patterns. It looks so desperate." "I packed it," I lied. I hadn't touched my suitcase yet. My clothes were still piled in the guest room, a chaotic mountain of fabric I hadn't found the will to organize. She turned then, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. She walked toward me, her footsteps silent on the hardwood, and placed a cool hand on my forehead. Her touch was possessive, almost proprietary. "You look tired, darling. Maybe you should call and cancel. I'm sure they can manage without you for a few days." I leaned into her hand, trying to bridge the gap that had been widening between us since she found that old lockbox in the attic. The box I swore I'd destroyed years ago. The box she hadn't mentioned once since she opened it. "I can't cancel, Elle. We both know that." She pulled her hand away, her smile sharpening into something else entirely. She walked over to my laptop bag sitting on the chair by the door. She lingered near it, her fingers brushing the strap, and for a split second, I saw her reflection in the dark glass of the oven door. Her eyes weren't looking at the bag. They were looking at the door to the basement, the one I kept deadbolted behind a bookshelf. "Chicago," she whispered to the room, though she was looking at me. "Such a long way to go to leave something behind. Are you sure you're taking everything you need?" My stomach dropped. I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. "What is that supposed to mean?" She walked past me, heading toward the stairs. She paused on the first step, her profile silhouetted against the morning light, looking like a statue of a woman I no longer recognized. "I just mean that people leave parts of themselves in places they think are hidden, Mark. And usually, when they go back to check on those things, they realize someone else has already packed them away." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I watched her walk upstairs, her pace rhythmic and measured. As soon as I heard the click of the bedroom door, I rushed to the guest room. I grabbed my laptop bag, unzipping the hidden compartment in the lining, the one where I kept the key to the basement lock. It wasn't there. I tore the bag apart, dumping my chargers and folders onto the floor, but the pocket was empty. My breath hitched, a cold spike of panic piercing my chest. I scrambled toward the bookshelf, pulling the heavy mahogany frame aside to reveal the reinforced steel door. The deadbolt was still engaged, but the keyhole was different. It wasn't the jagged, rusted metal I was used to. It looked like someone had melted lead into it, sealing the mechanism shut from the outside. Then, from the upstairs bedroom, I heard the faint, rhythmic sound of a suitcase being zipped shut. It wasn't my suitcase. It was the large, leather-bound trunk Elena had kept in the back of her closet for years, the one she claimed held only old wedding photos. I sprinted to the bedroom door and shoved it open. Elena was sitting on the bed, my passport and my phone sitting neatly on the duvet cover next to her. She wasn't packing clothes. She was loading a high-capacity drive into a sleek metallic device I had only ever seen in the hands of government contractors. She looked up at me, her expression devoid of the warmth I had mistaken for love for the last 5 years. She tapped the screen of my phone and it lit up with a notification. It was a bank alert, but not for my account. It was a massive, untraceable transfer of every cent we owned into a shell corporation I didn't recognize. "The flight to Chicago doesn't exist, Mark," she said, her voice dropping into a register so low and cold it made me shiver. "And neither does the identity you've been hiding behind." I didn't just find that lockbox. I spent the last 3 months rewriting the contents. She stood up, holding my phone out to me. The screen was a live video feed. It was the basement. The wall was wide open, exposing the inner sanctum where I kept my life's work, the documents, the ledger, the evidence. But it wasn't empty. It was filled with men in dark tactical gear, methodically bagging every single piece of evidence I had spent a decade gathering. "Who are they?" I choked out, my voice failing me. She walked past me, stepping out into the hallway with her trunk in hand. She didn't stop or look back. "They're the people you sold your soul to, darling, and they're here to collect the interest." She reached the front door and opened it, revealing not the quiet suburban street I lived on, but an armored transport idling in the driveway, its engine growling like a hungry beast. She paused, her hand on the knob, and looked back at me one last time. "You thought you were the predator in this house, Mark, but you were just the bait." She stepped out, and as the heavy door slammed shut, the house groaned. I heard the distinct, unmistakable sound of a heavy metal bolt sliding home on the other side. I ran to the window, pulling back the curtains, but the view was already gone, replaced by the blinding glare of high-intensity floodlights trained directly on my front porch, and the sound of boots hitting the floorboards of my house from every direction. The floorboards beneath me screamed as the house began to shake. It wasn't an earthquake. It was the synchronized, brutal impact of a tactical entry team hitting the back door. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, but the panic was quickly being overwritten by a cold, sharp survival instinct I hadn't tapped into for years. I didn't waste time trying the front door again. Elena had locked me in, and she knew exactly how these custom security systems worked. She'd been the one to install the overrides. I scrambled back toward the hallway, my mind racing through the blueprint of the house. There was no way out through the windows. They were reinforced with ballistic film. I was a rat in a maze, and the walls were closing in. I dived into the laundry room, pushing aside a row of heavy winter coats to reveal the floor panel I had installed as a contingency. I clawed at the latch, my fingers slipping on the smooth brass. Behind me, the sound of splintering wood echoed from the kitchen. They weren't whispering or trying to be stealthy anymore. They were taking the house apart, piece by piece. "Subject is inside the perimeter," a voice boomed, mechanical, flat, and chillingly professional. "Use lethal force if necessary. We only need the drive, not the man." My blood turned to ice. The drive. They didn't even want me alive for interrogation. I was a loose thread, and they were finally snipping me off. I threw the floor panel open and dropped into the crawl space just as the kitchen door flew off its hinges. The crash was deafening. I kicked the panel shut above me, the darkness swallowing me whole. I scrambled through the narrow, dusty gap, the smell of damp earth and rot filling my lungs. I reached the junction where the utility lines ran out to the street's main grid, my only chance. I pulled a small, jagged tool from my pocket, a modified bypass key I'd kept hidden in the seam of my jeans. I jammed it into the junction box, but my hands were shaking too hard. Clang! A boot hit the floor directly above my head. Then another. They were right on top of me. "I see the access point," a voice rumbled directly above the ceiling joists. "He's under the utility floor." I didn't wait. I wrenched the handle of the junction box with every ounce of strength I had, ripping the power cables loose. A spark showered the small space, blinding me, followed by a surge of heat that singed my shirt. The house's electrical system shorted out with a violent pop, plunging everything into total, suffocating silence. The security cameras, the electronic locks, the silent alarms, everything died. I lunged for the release hatch that opened into the drainage pipe beneath the foundation. I hit the lever, but it didn't budge. I pulled harder, my muscles screaming. Click. The door slid open, but not because of my effort. It had been triggered by an external command. I peered out into the tunnel, expecting an exit, but my flashlight revealed something far worse. Staring back at me from the darkness of the drain pipe was a red laser sight, perfectly centered on my forehead. And standing behind the weapon, silhouetted by the moonlight filtering through the storm grate above, was Elena. She wasn't holding a gun. She was holding a detonator, her thumb hovering over a glowing orange button. "You always were predictable, Mark," she said, her voice echoing perfectly through the pipes. "You spend a lifetime building a fortress, only to realize the person you invited inside has the keys to your destruction." "Elena, don't," I breathed, my hand hovering near my own hidden blade, though I knew it was useless. "We can talk about this. You don't know what they'll do to you once I'm gone. You're just a liability to them now, too." She laughed, a low, haunting sound that vibrated through the metal piping. "Oh, my sweet, naive man. I'm not a liability. I'm the one who submitted the invoice." She leaned down, her face inches from the grate. Her eyes were hard, devoid of even the shadow of the woman I'd shared a bed with for half a decade. "I didn't find that lockbox by accident. I planted it. I watched you sweat over those files for 3 years, waiting for the moment you'd finally finish the compilation. I just needed you to do the work so I didn't have to." The floor above us groaned as the tactical team began to cut through the wood. They were seconds away from tearing the house open and finding me, but Elena wasn't looking at them. She was looking at me, her finger tightening on the detonator. "The house is rigged, Mark," she whispered, a cruel, triumphant smile spreading across her face. "Not to keep them out, but to make sure that when they find you, there's nothing left to identify." The floor joists above us exploded in a shower of sparks and splinters, and as the men dropped into the space around me, Elena pressed the button. The world didn't just explode, it imploded. The blast was a precision-engineered kinetic strike, designed to collapse the structure inward rather than outward. As the floor joists disintegrated, the basement became a crushing tomb of steel, concrete, and splintered mahogany. I didn't wait for the heat to reach me. As the ceiling gave way, I threw myself into the drainage pipe, scrambling backward like a frantic, desperate animal. The sound was a roar so absolute it stripped the sensation of hearing from my brain. I felt the shockwave slam into my back, a physical punch that sent me skidding through the muck, sliding deeper into the darkness of the subterranean labyrinth. I coughed, my throat raw with the taste of pulverized drywall and acrid smoke. Everything was pitch black. My ears were ringing with a high-pitched, agonizing whine, and for a moment, I couldn't tell if I was alive or if the explosion had finally erased me. "Target neutralized." A muffled, distorted voice rasped somewhere above the wreckage. It was barely audible through the ringing in my head. "Confirming structural collapse. The asset is buried." I pressed my back against the cold, slimy wall of the pipe, holding my breath until my lungs burned. Above me, I could hear the heavy, methodical thud of boots walking across the debris of what had once been my life. They were hunting, checking for remains. I reached into my pocket, my fingers trembling as I pulled out a small, waterproof emergency beacon, the one piece of hardware I'd kept truly off the grid. If I activated it, it would ping a location to a private server in Switzerland, alerting the only people left who might actually care that I was gone. But it would also immediately broadcast my coordinates to anyone with a satellite receiver. It was a beacon for the wolves as much as the rescue. I heard a heavy metallic thud, the sound of a pry bar digging into the concrete slab above the drainage grate. They were checking the basement level. They were looking for the body. I didn't have time to hesitate. I keyed the beacon, and a faint, pulsating blue light flickered in my palm. Ping! The signal was out. "Wait!" Another voice cut through the air, sharper and more authoritative. The assets file mentioned a secondary extraction point. "Check the pipe outflow near the north ridge." My blood ran cold. They knew about the drainage system. Of course they did. Elena had likely provided the blueprints for every inch of the property. I crawled forward, the mud slicking my clothes, my heart drumming against my ribs like a countdown clock. I had to reach the surface, but the pipe was rapidly narrowing, sloping sharply downward into a deep, flooded collector. I turned a corner in the pipe and stopped dead. Standing in the shallow, stagnant water, illuminated by the beam of a tactical flashlight, was a silhouette. It wasn't one of the soldiers, it was a woman. She was wearing a heavy black coat, her hair pulled back into a tight, utilitarian braid. She stood perfectly still, watching me approach, a silenced pistol held at her side with the casual grace of a professional. "You're late, Mark," she said, her voice sounding unnervingly like a recording. She tilted her head, the light hitting her face. It was Elena, but not the wife who had left the house 10 minutes ago. This was someone colder, someone sharper. She had changed her clothes, shed the facade of the domestic partner, and stepped into the role of the cleaner. "Why?" I gasped, my voice cracking. "I gave you everything. Every secret, every account, every piece of leverage I had against the board." She stepped closer, the water splashing softly against her boots. "You gave me the files, yes. But you were the only piece of the puzzle that was still talking. And you can't build a new empire while you're still guarding the skeletons of the old one." She raised the pistol. The red laser dot danced across my chest, flickering in the low light. "You aren't going to kill me," I spat, pulling the beacon from my pocket and holding it up. "If you pull that trigger, the signal stops. My people will know exactly where I am and exactly who you are. The moment my heart stops, the dead man's switch on my server dumps every document I have, including your real name, your history, and the bank accounts you just drained, to every news outlet in the hemisphere. You'll be the most hunted woman on the planet by sunrise." Elena didn't blink. She didn't even twitch. A slow, terrifying smile crept across her face, the first genuine emotion I had seen from her in years, and it was pure, unadulterated malice. "Mark," she whispered, stepping into my personal space until the barrel of her gun was pressed firmly against my sternum. "Do you honestly think I didn't hack that server before we even left the kitchen?" She tapped her earpiece, and a rhythmic, taunting tone began to play, a digital melody that meant my server had been wiped clean. "I didn't just drain your accounts," she continued, her finger tightening on the trigger. "I erased your history. To the world, you never existed, and in exactly 10 seconds, you're going to stop existing to yourself too." She didn't wait for my response. She looked over my shoulder toward the entrance of the pipe. Behind me, the sound of heavy boots echoed in the confined space. They had found the entrance. "Don't worry," she whispered, her eyes turning toward the encroaching light of the soldiers' flashlights. "I'll make sure they report that you died a hero. It's the least I can do for a man who spent his whole life working for people he thought he could outsmart." As the soldiers reached the corner, shining their blinding lights directly onto us, Elena pressed her hand against my chest, pushed me backward into the rising, toxic water of the collector, and fired a single shot into the ceiling above us. The blast of the suppressed weapon was barely a whisper, but the consequence was instantaneous. The pressure in the pipe, already strained by the structural damage above, gave way with a horrific, grinding screech of buckling metal. The water began to surge, and as the ceiling collapsed, I felt the heavy hand of one of the soldiers grab my collar, hauling me upward into the blinding light, while Elena vanished into the shadows, leaving behind nothing but the scent of ozone and the realization that she had been setting this trap from the very first day we met. The soldier slammed my face into the wet concrete, his knee pinning my neck to the ground. He leaned in close, his voice a gravelly snarl. "We found the drive, Mark, but we need the decryption key. And believe me, you're going to tell us everything." He pulled a device from his belt, a neural interface probe. My blood turned to ice as I recognized the shape of it. It wasn't for interrogation. It was for extraction. "Wait," I choked out, my vision blurring. I can't give it to you. It's not in my head." The soldier laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "That's what they all say. But once we wire you in, you won't have a choice. He forced my head back, and I felt the cold, sharp prongs of the probe touch the base of my skull. Just as the current surged through me, I saw a figure emerge from the darkness behind the soldier. It was Elena, holding a tablet, her face glowing with a cold, digital light. She wasn't here to save me. She was here to record the harvest. "Start," she said, her voice devoid of mercy. The pain wasn't immediate. It was a sudden, violent tearing of my consciousness, as if my very memories were being ripped from my brain, bite by bite. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the roar of the house continuing to collapse around us. As my mind began to fragment, I saw something that shattered the last of my resolve. Elena wasn't looking at the extraction. She was looking at the camera on the soldier's shoulder, waving goodbye to an audience I couldn't see. And then she reached out and pulled the trigger on a remote control in her other hand. The floor beneath us didn't just break. It began to dissolve into white-hot static. The sensation was like being flayed alive, not in body, but in soul. The neural probe didn't just extract data. It siphoned the very color from my memories. I felt my first childhood birthday, the scent of rain on hot pavement, the specific weight of the secrets I'd buried, all being shredded and pulled through a digital straw. As the world dissolved into jagged, monochromatic static, I saw Elena's face floating in the chaos. She looked like a goddess of the machine, cold and pristine, watching the flicker of my life being projected onto the walls of the collapsing tunnel. She wasn't just stealing my secrets, she was erasing the architecture of my identity. "Stop," I tried to roar, but my voice was nothing more than a digital hiss. "You're killing me!" Elena didn't look at me. She kept her eyes on the tablet, her thumbs moving with the fluid grace of a concert pianist. "I'm not killing you, Mark. I'm formatting you. There's a difference." The soldier pinning me down let out a grunt of confusion as his own tactical HUD began to glitch. The white-hot static was spreading. It was crawling up the walls, eating through the steel rebar, and turning the concrete into a translucent, shimmering vapor. This wasn't just a physical collapse. It was a localized reality failure. Whatever program Elena was running, it was dismantling the laws of physics along with my consciousness. "The key!" the soldier shouted, his voice warping into a dissonant, mechanical drone. "The encryption is recursive. It's fighting back." Elena's expression flickered for the first time, a thin, brittle line of annoyance. "It's not fighting back. He's trying to trigger the failsafe. He's trying to burn the whole server down with him." She reached down, grabbing my chin with a grip like a vice, and forced me to look at her. Her eyes were no longer brown. They were pulsing with a soft, bioluminescent blue light. She was plugged in, integrated, a vessel for the very data she had spent years hunting. "You think you're a martyr?" she whispered, her voice echoing inside my own skull. "You think if you die, the truth dies with you? You were just the key, Mark. And now that I've turned you, you have no further utility." She tapped her tablet one last time, and the world shrieked. The floor beneath us gave way completely, not into a hole, but into an abyss of infinite, flowing code. I felt myself falling, weightless, drifting through a stream of my own stolen memories. I saw my parents' faces, then the image of the first man I ever betrayed, then the layout of the vault in Geneva. All of it swirling around me like autumn leaves in a hurricane. I hit something solid, but it didn't feel like ground. It felt like a mirror. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in ragged, freezing gasps. I was back in the kitchen. But it wasn't my kitchen. The cabinets were transparent, revealing the wiring